I'm Maya, 32 years old, and 3 months ago, I received a package that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, plain brown cardboard, no return address, just my name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in 7 years. Inside was a recipe box, the kind our grandmothers kept on kitchen counters, wooden, worn smooth by decades of use. Tucked under the index cards was a USB drive and a note that said, "Cook the truth, Maya. The recipe's been waiting." What I found on that drive, hundreds of documents, recordings, and a video message from my Aunt Carolyn, changed everything I believed about my mother, my uncle, and the family business I was told I'd never be smart enough to understand. Before I go any further, if this story speaks to you, please like and subscribe. But only if you genuinely feel moved to, and drop a comment telling me, where are you right now? What's the weather like where you are? Now, let me take you back 7 years, to the day of Aunt Caroline's funeral, where this whole thing really started. The funeral was held at St. Mark's Cathedral, the old stone church downtown where our family had attended services for 3 generations. My Aunt Caroline lay in a simple pine casket, per her wishes, surrounded by wildflowers from her own garden. She would have hated the formal arrangements the funeral home tried to sell us, all those stiff white roses and baby's breath. She'd always said real flowers had dirt under their roots and bees on their petals. But nobody asked what she would have wanted. They asked my uncle, Thomas Hartwell, who decided everything. Thomas stood at the pulpit in a charcoal suit that probably cost $3,000, delivering a eulogy he'd clearly had someone else write. My sister Caroline, he said, voice catching in all the right places, was a woman of simple pleasures. She loved her garden, her books, her quiet life. She never married, never had children, but she touched many lives in her own way. I sat in the 3rd row, sandwiched between cousins I barely knew, listening to him erase who she really was. Aunt Caroline wasn't simple. She had a master's degree in biochemistry. She'd worked for 20 years as a research scientist before something happened that nobody would ever explain to me. She just stopped, my mother told me once. Decided the work wasn't for her anymore. Moved into that little house and started planting vegetables. My mother, Janet, sat in the front row beside Thomas, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of grief. My cousin Bradley, Thomas's son, 28 years old and already vice president of Hartwell Industries, sat on his father's other side checking his phone every few minutes. Nobody seemed to notice. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't care. I was 25 then, working as a graphic designer at a small marketing firm, making $38,000 a year in a city where rent alone took half my paycheck. I was the family disappointment, the girl who went to state school instead of an Ivy, the one who chose art over business, the one who, according to my uncle, lacked the Hartwell ambition gene. But here's what I kept thinking about, sitting in that pew, pretending to pray. Aunt Caroline used to sneak me into her laboratory when I was little, before she left the company. She'd put on a tiny lab coat she'd had made specially for me and let me look through microscopes at cells that looked like tiny cities. She told me I had a scientist's eyes. She said I saw patterns other people missed, and every year on my birthday she sent me a card with a quote from a woman in STEM, Marie Curie, Jane Goodall, Mae Jemison. She never sent money, she sent belief. I didn't know then that she'd been documenting something for years, building a case, waiting for the right moment to blow everything wide open. I only knew that she was gone, and the one person who'd ever made me feel like I mattered had taken her secrets with her. To understand what happened next, you need to understand the Hartwell family dynamics, such as they were. My grandfather, Robert Hartwell, built Hartwell Industries from nothing, started in his garage in 1968, creating specialized polymers for medical devices. By the time he died in 2003, it was worth $40 million. He had 3 children. Thomas, the oldest, who took over as CEO. My mother, Janet, the middle child, who married my father and became a stay-at-home mom. And Caroline, the youngest, who was, according to everyone, the smartest of them all. My grandfather's will was simple. Thomas got controlling interest, 51%. Janet and Caroline split the rest, 24.5% each. Everyone seemed fine with that. Thomas ran the company. Mom stayed home with me and my sister Lily. And Caroline worked in the research and development department, creating the innovations that made Hartwell Industries actually profitable. That arrangement lasted for 15 years. Then, when I was 12, Caroline suddenly resigned. No explanation, no farewell party, no nothing. She just stopped showing up. Within a month, she'd sold her shares back to Thomas for what I later learned was a fraction of their worth, moved into a small cottage on the edge of town, and became, in my uncle's words, a recluse. I remember asking my mother why Aunt Caroline left. "Your aunt made some choices," Mom said, voice tight. "Sometimes people aren't cut out for the business world, honey. It takes a certain strength." The implication was clear. Caroline was weak. Caroline couldn't handle it. Caroline chose to walk away, but I remember visiting her in that cottage. The first time, just a few weeks after she'd moved in. I was 12 years old, confused about why my favorite aunt had suddenly disappeared from family dinners, from holiday gatherings, from my life. My mother had finally agreed to let me visit, probably because I'd begged for 3 straight weeks and she was tired of hearing about it. The cottage was small but beautiful, surrounded by overgrown gardens that Caroline was just beginning to tame. She met me at the door wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, dirt under her fingernails, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked different from the polished professional I'd known at the company, but also somehow more herself. "Maya," she said, and pulled me into a hug that lasted a long time. "I'm so glad you're here. We spent that afternoon planting tomatoes. She taught me about soil pH, about companion planting, about how certain vegetables grew better when they were planted near certain herbs. She talked to me like I was an adult, like my questions mattered, like my thoughts were worth hearing. I asked her, finally, why she'd left Hartwell Industries. She was quiet for a long moment, her hands stilling in the dirt. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "people in power make choices that hurt the people around them. And sometimes, the only way to protect yourself is to step away, even when it costs you everything you've built." I didn't understand then what she meant. Didn't understand about the threats, about the stolen patents, about the choice between her integrity and her career. But I remember how her hands shook when she poured tea after we came inside, how she'd flinch at loud noises, how she'd sometimes stop mid-sentence and stare out the window like she was seeing something the rest of us couldn't. That wasn't weakness. That was trauma. Post-traumatic stress from months of psychological warfare waged by her own brother. She kept visiting me, even after I moved back to my father's house, even as the rest of the family slowly froze her out. Every few months, she'd show up at our door with a book she thought I'd like, or a jar of honey from her garden, or just a card with a quote from a woman scientist on the front. My mother would let her in, offer coffee, make awkward small talk for exactly 15 minutes, then find an excuse to leave the room. Thomas never came over when Caroline was there, never acknowledged her existence except in the occasional dismissive comment. "My sister's lost her ambition," he'd say at Thanksgiving, after one too many scotches. Shame, really. All that potential, wasted on tomatoes. But Caroline never stopped believing in me. When I got an A on my 7th grade science project, she took me out for ice cream to celebrate. When I was struggling with algebra in 8th grade, she came over every Tuesday night for 6 weeks to tutor me. When I got accepted to State University, she was the first person I called. Before my mother, before my friends, because I knew she'd be proud. And she was. She took me to lunch at a nice restaurant, told me that education was about learning to think, not about prestige or brand names. "Your uncle went to an Ivy League school," she said, "and he still can't think beyond his own self-interest. You're going to learn to see systems, to understand how the world connects. That's worth more than any name on a degree." I held on to those words through 4 years of family gatherings where Thomas would ask, "Still at State?" and make it sound like a moral failing, where Bradley would talk about his Princeton classes like they were happening on a different planet from mine, somewhere superior and inaccessible, where my mother would introduce me to people by saying, "This is Maya, she's studying art," like it was an apology. My father died when I was 16, heart attack, sudden and devastating. My mother fell apart for exactly 3 months, then pulled herself together and went to work for Thomas at Hartwell Industries. She became his executive assistant, which mostly meant she managed his calendar, booked his travel, and smiled at business partners during company events. The pay was good, $70,000 a year, and Thomas made sure everyone knew how prestigious he was being, giving his sister a job when she had no experience. I graduated high school, went to State University, studied graphic design because I loved creating things and because nobody in my family thought I was smart enough for anything else. "You're creative," my mother would say, like it was a consolation prize. Not everyone can be a Bradley, who'd gone to Princeton, who'd interned at Goldman Sachs, who'd joined Hartwell Industries at 23 and was already being groomed to take over. Bradley, the golden child, the heir apparent, the grandson who mattered. I got my degree in 4 years, moved into a studio apartment with a roommate, started working at Fletcher Marketing for $38,000 a year. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every family gathering, the same pattern. Thomas would corner me at some point, usually after his 3rd scotch, and ask, "Still pushing pixels?" "Yes, Uncle Thomas. What's that pay these days, 40 grand? 38, actually." He'd laugh, not meanly, just dismissively, like I'd confirmed something he already knew. "I pay my receptionist more than that. But hey, you're doing what you love, right? That's what matters." Except it didn't matter. Not to him, not to my mother, who'd apologized for my career choices more times than I could count. "Oh, Maya, yes, she's in advertising, sort of. She does design work, it's creative." Not to Bradley, who'd once told me at a wedding that graphic design wasn't a real career. It was a hobby people did until they grew up. The only person who never made me feel small was Aunt Carolyn. She came to my college graduation when my mother had a work conflict, Thomas was at a conference, and nobody else could be bothered. She sat in the audience with a bouquet of sunflowers and cheered so loud when I walked across the stage that people turned around to look. Afterward, we got coffee, and she asked me about my portfolio, actually looked at my work, asked questions about my design process. "This one," she said, pointing to a poster I'd made for a campus environmental group. "This shows systems thinking. You see how everything connects. That's rare, Maya. Don't let anyone tell you it's not valuable." I think about that conversation a lot now, how she used the word systems, how she touched the corner of the poster where I'd hidden a tiny detail, a pattern that repeated in 3 different places. She saw what I was doing. She always had. 3 weeks after her funeral, Thomas called a family meeting. His office, Saturday morning, 10 a.m. sharp. My mother and I arrived together. Bradley was already there, sitting in one of the leather chairs across from Thomas's massive desk. The walls were covered in framed articles about the company, photos of Thomas shaking hands with politicians and CEOs, awards and plaques that spelled out success in brass and crystal. Thomas waited until we were seated before pulling out a folder. "Caroline's estate," he said, "has been settled. As you know, she lived simply. The cottage, her savings, a few personal effects. I've been named executor." He opened the folder, adjusted his reading glasses. "To my brother-in-law, Janet, I leave my cottage and its contents to be used as she sees fit." My mother's eyes widened. The cottage was small, but it sat on 2 acres of prime real estate on the edge of town, worth at least $400,000. To my nephew, Bradley Hartwell, I leave my collection of first edition science books, approximately 80 volumes, to encourage his continued intellectual curiosity. Bradley nodded, looking pleased. First editions from scientists like Darwin and Einstein were worth serious money. And to my niece, Maya Hartwell, Thomas paused, and I swear to God he smiled. I leave my recipe box and its contents, with the hope that she'll find nourishment in simple pleasures. The recipe box, a wooden box full of index cards with recipes for pot roast and apple pie. That was it. My mother reached over and patted my hand. "That's sweet," she whispered. She knew how much you loved her cooking. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. Bradley was already asking Thomas about getting the books appraised for insurance purposes. And Thomas was nodding, making plans, already moving on to estate taxes and property transfers. I signed where they told me to sign. I took the recipe box they'd pulled from some storage room. I walked out of that office believing that Aunt Caroline, the woman who'd cheered at my graduation, who told me I had a scientist's eyes, had looked at my life and decided it was worth a box of recipes. 7 years passed. I kept working at Fletcher Marketing, got promoted to senior designer, started making $48,000 a year, enough to get my own studio apartment without a roommate. I stopped going to most family gatherings. Thanksgiving with people who saw you as a failure got old fast. My mother occasionally texted to check in, always with an undertone of disappointment. "Are you still at that marketing place?" "Bradley's doing so well. He's been promoted again." "Yes, Mom, still here. That's nice about Bradley." The recipe box sat on my kitchen shelf, unopened. I couldn't bring myself to look at it. Couldn't face those handwritten cards that represented everything I wasn't worth. Until one Tuesday afternoon when a package arrived. Brown cardboard, my name in Aunt Caroline's handwriting, postmarked from a law firm I'd never heard of. Inside, the recipe box. My recipe box. The one I'd shoved on a shelf and tried to forget. Except now there was a USB drive tucked under the index cards, and a note in that same familiar handwriting. "Cook the truth, Maya. The recipe's been waiting." My hands shook as I pulled out my laptop, inserted the drive. The desktop filled with folders, hundreds of files organized by year, going back 23 years. I clicked on the most recent one, dated just a week before Caroline died. A video file. I hit play. Aunt Caroline appeared on screen, sitting in her garden, sunlight filtering through the apple trees behind her. She looked thin, tired, but her eyes, God, her eyes were clear and sharp as ever. "Hello, Maya," she said. "If you're watching this, I'm gone, and Thomas has already given you the recipe box, exactly as I planned. I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you any of this while I was alive. I tried, so many times, but I knew you weren't ready. You needed to live your life first, needed to become who you were going to be without my interference. But now it's time for you to know the truth." She took a breath, steadied herself. 23 years ago, I created something extraordinary, a new polymer compound, biodegradable, stronger than steel, completely revolutionary. It was going to change medical devices, change prosthetics, change everything. The patents alone would have been worth hundreds of millions. I brought it to Thomas. I was so proud, Maya. I thought we'd celebrate, thought he'd see what this meant for the company, for people who needed better medical options. Instead, he told me I needed to sign the patents over to Hartwell Industries. "Standard procedure," he said. "Company owns all employee innovations." On screen, Caroline's jaw tightened. But I developed it on my own time, using my own materials, in my own home laboratory. It wasn't a company innovation. It was mine. When I refused to sign, Thomas told me I was being selfish, that I was betraying the family, that our father would have been ashamed of me. He froze me out, stopped inviting me to meetings, reassigned my projects, made my life at the company unbearable. Then one day, he came to my office with papers. "Sign over the patents, or I'll make sure you never work in this field again. I'll tell everyone you falsified research data, that you're unstable, unreliable. Your career will be over." She paused, and I could see tears in her eyes. I was 39 years old, Maya. I dedicated my entire adult life to that company, to science. And my own brother was threatening to destroy me unless I gave him my work. So I made a choice. I signed over the patents. I sold him my shares for a fraction of their worth. I left before he could destroy my reputation completely. And I documented everything. My chest felt tight. I couldn't breathe. "The files on this drive," Caroline continued, "are 23 years of evidence. Emails where Thomas admits the polymer was my independent creation. Financial records showing he undervalued my shares when he bought them out. patent filings where he lists himself as the primary inventor, which is fraud, documentation of the threats he made, the retaliation, everything. That polymer became the foundation of Hartwell Industries' most profitable product line. It made the company worth over $200 million. Thomas built his empire on my work, and he paid me $300,000 for shares that were worth, even then, at least $10 million. She leaned closer to the camera. I've spent 7 years working with lawyers, preparing everything for the moment when you'd be ready, when you'd be strong enough to handle what comes next. There's a law firm, Sanderson and Associates, waiting for your call. They have instructions, a legal strategy, everything you need. Your mother chose Thomas over me. She believed his lies, or maybe she just found it easier to pretend she believed them. But you, Maya, you have the scientist's eyes. You see patterns, you see systems, and you're going to expose the truth, not just for me, but for yourself. Because Thomas has been telling you your whole life that you're not smart enough, not ambitious enough, not Hartwell enough. And that, my darling girl, is the biggest lie of all. The video ended. I sat there in my tiny studio apartment staring at the screen, trying to process what I'd just heard. My uncle, the man who'd built a $200 million company, had stolen it from his own sister. My mother, who'd worked for him for 16 years, had either known or chosen not to know. My Aunt Caroline, who I'd thought abandoned me with nothing but recipes, had spent her final years building a case that would blow the whole thing apart. And she'd waited for me, trusted me to finish what she'd started. Emails from 22 years ago where Thomas pressured Caroline to sign over the patents. Financial statements showing the true value of her shares versus what he'd paid her. Legal documents where he'd listed himself as the inventor on patents that had Caroline's signature all over the research notes. Recordings of meetings where he'd threatened her, told her she'd never work again, called her unstable and paranoid. And a detailed legal brief prepared by Sanderson and Associates outlining a case for fraud, patent theft, and securities fraud. By sunrise, I knew what I had to do. I called the law firm at 9 a.m., sharp. They were expecting me. By noon, I was sitting in a conference room with 3 attorneys who laid out exactly what Caroline had prepared. The case was airtight. We file civil suits for fraud, patent theft, and financial damages, Sarah Sanderson explained. She was maybe 50, gray hair pulled back, eyes like a shark. We're seeking full restoration of Caroline's share value, plus damages, plus her rightful share of all profits derived from her polymer technology over the past 23 years. That's, I couldn't do the math, conservatively, $80 to $90 million. Plus, she continued, we'll be filing complaints with the Patent Office and the SEC. Patent fraud is a federal crime. If the case is strong enough, and it is, Thomas could face criminal charges. My head spun. This will destroy him. It'll destroy the company. Possibly, Sarah said evenly. That's not our problem. Our problem is getting you what you're owed, what Caroline was owed. I want to tell you I hesitated, that I worried about my mother, my cousin, the employees at Hartwell Industries who'd lose their jobs if the company went under. But I'd be lying. All I could think about was every family dinner where I'd been made to feel small, every conversation where my career was dismissed as a hobby, every time Thomas had looked at me like I was proof that the Hartwell gene pool had gotten diluted, every time my mother had apologized for my existence to people who mattered more than I did. When do we file? I asked. Monday morning, Sarah said, which gives you the weekend to prepare for the fallout. Because once we file, your family is going to come at you with everything they have. Are you ready for that? I thought about Aunt Caroline, sitting in her garden documenting evidence for 7 years because she believed I'd be strong enough to handle this. I'm ready, I said. We filed on Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, my phone was exploding. 17 missed calls from my mother, 9 from Thomas, 4 from Bradley. Text messages ranging from concerned to furious. Maya, please call me. We need to talk about this. This is insane. You're destroying the family. How could you do this to your own family? I didn't answer any of them. Wednesday morning, Thomas's lawyers filed a motion to dismiss, claimed the patents were clearly work for hire, that Caroline had been unstable when she made her accusations, that this was a shakedown by a niece who'd never succeeded at anything and wanted easy money. Sarah Sanderson laughed when she showed me the filing. "They're scared," she said. "Good. That means they know we have them." The motion to dismiss was denied Friday afternoon. The judge looked at our evidence, at Caroline's documentation, and said the case had sufficient merit to proceed to discovery. By Friday evening, it was all over the news. Local tech blog picked it up first, then the business papers. Hartwell Industries CEO accused of patent theft, company built on stolen innovation, family feud erupts over $200 million empire. My mother showed up at my apartment Saturday morning. I could see her through the peephole, looking smaller than I remembered, clutching her purse like a shield. I almost didn't open the door, almost pretended I wasn't home. But something made me turn that deadbolt, something that wanted to hear what she'd say, how she'd try to explain away 16 years of choosing Thomas over everyone else. "Maya, please," she said when I finally let her in. "We need to talk about this." Her voice was shaky, uncertain in a way I'd never heard before. She'd always been so composed, so carefully controlled, the perfect executive assistant, the perfect supporter of her brother's empire. "There's nothing to talk about, Mom. You saw the evidence. You know what Thomas did to Caroline. You were in that courtroom. You heard the testimony." She flinched, set her purse down on my small kitchen table like she needed something to do with her hands. I didn't know about the threats, about the retaliation. I thought she wanted a quieter life. I couldn't help it, I laughed, sharp and bitter. A quieter life? Mom. She was 39 years old at the peak of her career. She'd just made a breakthrough that could have changed medicine forever. And you thought she just decided to plant tomatoes instead. She was silent, staring at the table. "You worked for him for 16 years, I said, my voice rising despite myself. "You sat at the desk outside his office. You managed his calendar, his emails, his files. You never asked why your sister suddenly left. You never wondered why she sold her shares for so little. You never thought it was strange that she stopped talking to the family, that she flinched when his name was mentioned. You never once questioned the official story?" My mother's hands twisted together, a gesture I recognized from childhood, from every time my father had yelled at her, from every time she'd chosen peace over truth. I couldn't afford to question him, Maya. Your father had just died. I had 2 daughters to support, no work experience, no prospects. Thomas gave me a job, a good job. He helped pay for your college, for Lily's college. He paid you with money he stole from Caroline," I interrupted. "Every dollar of your salary, every contribution to my tuition, it all came from the fortune he built on her stolen innovation. That doesn't make you grateful, Mom. That makes you complicit. That's not fair, Maya. He's family. So was Caroline," I shot back. "So am I. But that didn't stop either of you from making me feel worthless my entire life. Do you have any idea how many times I sat at those family dinners and listened to you apologize for my existence?" My mother's eyes filled with tears, mascara starting to run. I never meant. "Yes, you did," I said, quieter now, but no less firm. "Every time someone asked what I did and you said, 'Oh, she's in advertising, sort of. She does design work, it's creative,' like you were embarrassed. Like you needed to explain why I wasn't Bradley, wasn't successful, wasn't worthy of the Hartwell name. Every time Thomas made a joke about my salary and you laughed along, even though you knew it hurt me. Every time you chose their approval over my dignity." She sat down heavily in one of my chairs, shoulders shaking. "I thought I was protecting you," she whispered. "From what?" I asked. "From the truth? From the reality that Thomas was a thief and a bully? From knowing that the family you worked so hard to be part of was built on lies?" Her tears were coming harder now. I thought if I just kept my head down, if I was useful enough, valuable enough, he'd take care of us. He'd make sure you and Lily were okay. I couldn't risk losing that. And Caroline? I asked. What about her? She looked up at me, face blotchy and red. Caroline made her choice. She could have signed the papers, could have played along, could have stayed. That's what you really think? I said, feeling something break inside me. That she chose to be threatened and retaliated against? That she chose to be traumatized so badly she could barely function? That she chose to lose everything she'd worked for because she wouldn't let her own brother steal from her? My mother had no answer to that. Just sat there crying, waiting, I realized, for me to comfort her. Waiting for me to tell her it was okay, that I understood, that we could move past this. But I was done comforting people who'd never considered my feelings. I think you should go, I said quietly. Maya, please, we can't just... We're done here, Mom. She stood slowly, picked up her purse, walked to the door. She turned back once, hand on the doorknob. I did the best I could, she said, with what I had, with what I knew how to do. I know you did, I said, and it wasn't good enough. Not for Caroline, not for me. And I'm done pretending it was. She left. The door clicked shut behind her, and I stood there in my tiny kitchen, shaking, feeling like I'd just survived something. Rachel called me an hour later. She'd been one of the co-workers in the courtroom gallery, had watched my mother leave without speaking to me. You okay? She asked. I don't know, I said honestly. I just told my mother we're done. About time, Rachel said, not unkindly. She made her choice, Maya. 20 years of choices, actually, and every single one of them was the wrong one. I didn't hear from my mother again for 3 weeks. When I finally did, it was an email, not a phone call, just one line. You destroyed him. You destroyed our family. I hope you're happy. The discovery process was brutal. Thomas's lawyers fought every subpoena, every document request, every deposition, but we had Caroline's evidence and it was ironclad. In November, 6 months after we filed, they offered to settle. $20 million, Sarah told me over the phone. They want this to go away before it goes to trial, before the criminal investigation gets serious. I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. No, I said, this isn't about money. This is about the truth. You're sure? Sarah asked. Because $20 million is life-changing money, Maya. If we go to trial, we might win more, but we also risk losing. I'm sure, I said. I want Thomas to sit in a courtroom and admit what he did. I want it on the record. We went to trial in February. The night before opening statements, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my apartment staring at the ceiling, thinking about what it would mean to sit across a courtroom from my own family, to look my uncle in the eye and call him a thief, to know my mother would be there, supporting him, choosing him, just like she'd always chosen everyone else over me. Sarah called me at 6 a.m. How are you holding up? She asked. I'm terrified, I admitted. Good, she said. Fear means you understand what's at stake. But remember, we're not just fighting for money. We're fighting for Caroline's legacy. We're fighting for the truth. Keep that in your mind today. The courtroom was massive, all dark wood and marble, the kind of room designed to make you feel small. It was packed when we arrived, journalists in the back rows scribbling in notebooks, business reporters with cameras they couldn't use inside, employees from Hartwell Industries, some looking worried about their jobs, others looking curious, maybe even hopeful. My mother sat on Thomas's side of the room, 3 rows back. She wore navy blue, pearls at her throat, her hair perfectly styled. She looked like she was going to a country club luncheon, not a trial where her brother's crimes would be exposed. Bradley sat beside her, uncomfortable in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He kept glancing at his phone until the bailiff told everyone to turn them off. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Sarah and her team. For the first 5 minutes, I thought I was completely alone on my side of the courtroom. Then I looked back, really looked, and saw them. 7 people from Fletcher Marketing, my co-workers, my team. Rachel, who'd been my first friend when I started at the company, James, the copywriter I'd collaborated with on dozens of projects, Even Doug, our creative director, who'd given me my first promotion, they'd taken time off work to be here, to support me. Rachel caught my eye and gave me a small nod, like she was saying, "We've got you." I had to look away before I started crying. The judge entered, the Honorable Margaret Chen, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. She ran through preliminary instructions, reminded everyone that this was a court of law, and she expected professional behavior, then nodded to Sarah. "Opening statements, please." Sarah stood, smoothed her suit jacket, and walked to the center of the courtroom. She didn't use notes, didn't need them. "This case," she began, "is about theft, not the kind of theft where someone breaks a window and steals a television. This is theft of a different kind, more insidious, more devastating. This is a brother stealing from his sister, an employer stealing from his employee, a man stealing an innovation that would have changed the world and claiming it as his own." She paused. Let that sink in. Caroline Hartwell was a brilliant scientist. She held a master's degree in biochemistry. She dedicated 20 years of her life to research and development at Hartwell Industries. And in 2001, working in her home laboratory on her own time with her own materials, she created something extraordinary, a biodegradable polymer compound stronger than steel, revolutionary in its applications for medical devices. Sarah pulled up a slide on the screen, Caroline's original patent application, dated October 2001. "This is her work," she said, "her innovation, her intellectual property." And when she brought this discovery to her brother, Thomas Hartwell, expecting support and partnership, he did something unconscionable. He demanded she sign over her patents. When she refused, he threatened her, harassed her, made her working conditions so unbearable that she was forced to resign. Then he bought her company shares for a fraction of their worth, took credit for her innovation, and built a $200 million empire on her stolen work. She turned to look directly at Thomas. For 23 years, Thomas Hartwell has profited from his sister's genius while she lived in a cottage on the edge of town, traumatized and silenced. But Caroline Hartwell was brilliant in more ways than one. She documented everything, every email, every threat, every moment of retaliation. And before she died, she made sure that documentation would reach the one person she trusted to bring her the justice she deserved, her niece, Maya. Sarah gestured to me, and I felt every eye in the courtroom turn my way. "This case is about theft," Sarah repeated, "and it's about time the thief was held accountable." Thomas's lawyer, a man named Richard Kellerman, who looked like he charged $1,000 an hour, stood for his opening. He was smooth, polished, the kind of attorney who probably played golf with judges. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice warm and reasonable, "this is a tragic case, a family torn apart by misunderstanding and frankly by greed. Caroline Hartwell was a talented scientist, no one disputes that. But she was also an employee of Hartwell Industries. And like all employees, she signed an agreement when she was hired that any inventions created in the course of her employment would belong to the company." He pulled up a document, an employee agreement from 1983. This is standard practice in every research and development company in America. You can't have employees running off with company innovations. It would be chaos. Now, did Thomas Hartwell handle the situation perfectly? Perhaps not. Family dynamics are complicated. Emotions run high. But did he steal from his sister? Absolutely not. He followed company policy. He protected Hartwell Industries' intellectual property. And when Caroline chose to leave the company, he bought her shares at fair market value based on the valuation at the time. He paused, looked at the jury with a kind of paternal sympathy. What we have here is a niece who, sadly, has not achieved the same level of success as her cousin and her uncle. A niece who sees an opportunity to claim millions of dollars by rewriting history and painting her family as villains. We will show you that Caroline Hartwell's accusations were the product of a troubled mind, that her documentation was biased and taken out of context, and that Thomas Hartwell is a victim of a campaign to destroy his reputation and his life's work. I felt sick listening to him. The way he made it sound so reasonable, so logical, like Caroline was crazy, like I was greedy, like Thomas was the victim. But Sarah had warned me this would happen. They're going to try to flip the narrative, she'd said during trial prep. They're going to make you the villain. Don't react, just trust the evidence. We put Caroline on trial first, metaphorically speaking. Sarah played the video testimony Caroline had recorded before she died, and the courtroom went absolutely silent. Even the journalists stopped writing. Everyone just watched as Caroline, thin and tired but clear-eyed and coherent, explained exactly what had happened, how she'd created the polymer, how Thomas had demanded she sign over the patents, how he'd threatened and retaliated when she refused. I watched the jury as they watched her, saw their expressions shift from skeptical to engaged to, by the end, angry. This wasn't a crazy woman making wild accusations. This was a scientist, precise and methodical, presenting a case. After the video, we presented her research notes. Pages and pages of calculations, sketches, trial results, all in Caroline's handwriting, all dated before she'd ever mentioned the polymer to Thomas. Our polymer expert, Dr. Elizabeth Morton from MIT, testified for 3 hours about the innovation itself, about how the molecular structure was unlike anything that had existed before, about how the development process Caroline had documented was consistent with independent research, not company-directed work. Is there any indication in these notes that Miss Hartwell was working under company direction? Sarah asked. None whatsoever, Dr. Morton replied. This is independent research, original work, the kind of breakthrough that happens maybe once in a generation. Then came the emails. Thomas's lawyers tried to keep them out, claimed attorney-client privilege, claimed they were taken out of context. But the judge let them in, and we read them aloud in open court. Thomas to Caroline, 2002. You created this on company time with company resources. It belongs to Hartwell Industries. Sign the papers. Caroline to Thomas, I created this in my home laboratory using materials I purchased myself. This is my work. I'm willing to license it to the company, but I won't sign over the patents. Thomas, to the head of HR, Caroline Hartwell has been engaging in erratic behavior and making unfounded accusations against management. I'm concerned about her mental stability. Please document any unusual incidents. The courtroom went silent. Even Thomas's lawyer looked uncomfortable. We moved on to the financial records, showing how Thomas had paid Caroline $300,000 for shares worth millions, how he'd pressured her to sell during a period when he'd made her working conditions unbearable, how he'd then used her polymer technology to create product lines that generated hundreds of millions in revenue and never paid her another cent. By the time we rested our case, Thomas looked gray. His lawyers put him on the stand to defend himself. Big mistake. Sarah cross-examined him like a surgeon with a scalpel, precise and devastating. Mr. Hartwell, did you or did you not tell your sister that you would destroy her career if she didn't sign over the patents? I was upset. It was a family dispute. So that's a yes? I may have said things in anger, yes. And did you pay her $300,000 for shares that were worth significantly more? She wanted to sell. She wanted out. That's not what I asked. Did you pay her a fraction of what those shares were worth? The valuation was complicated. Mr. Hartwell, yes or no? He paused too long. Yes, he finally said. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They came back with a verdict in our favor on every count: fraud, patent theft, securities fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. Damages were set at $93 million to be paid from Thomas's personal assets and his shares in Hartwell Industries. The judge also referred the case to federal prosecutors for criminal investigation. I won. I sat in that courtroom and watched my uncle's face as the verdict was read, and I won. My mother left without speaking to me. Bradley followed her, wouldn't meet my eyes. Thomas's lawyers filed an appeal within a week, but Sarah said it wouldn't matter. The evidence was too strong, the verdict too clean. "You're going to get your money, Maya," she said, "and Thomas is going to face criminal charges. Patent fraud, securities fraud, possibly wire fraud if they can prove he used electronic communications to facilitate the scheme. He could go to prison." "How long?" I asked. 5 to 10 years, possibly more. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. The settlement, when it finally came through 8 months later, was $87 million after legal fees and taxes. The criminal trial was still pending. Thomas had already been forced to step down as CEO, forced to sell his majority stake in Hartwell Industries to pay the judgment. The company survived barely under new leadership. But the Hartwell name was mud in the industry. Nobody wanted to be associated with a family that stole from its own. My mother sent me one email after the settlement came through. "You destroyed him," it said. "You destroyed our family. I hope you're happy." I didn't respond, but I did think about her words for a long time. Had I destroyed the family, or had I just revealed what it had always been? A patriarch who stole from his sister. A son raised to believe he deserved everything. A daughter so desperate for approval that she'd ignore her own sister's suffering. I hadn't destroyed that family. I just stopped pretending it was something it wasn't. I didn't quit my job at Fletcher Marketing, which surprised everyone. "You're worth almost $90 million, my friend Rachel said. "Why are you still designing brochures for insurance companies?" But here's the thing about money. It can't buy what I loved about my work. The satisfaction of solving a visual problem, of taking complicated information and making it clear and beautiful. The relationships with clients who trusted my vision. The small team I'd built. Designers and writers who respected my leadership. Caroline understood that. She didn't leave me money because she thought I'd made wrong choices. She left me the truth and the tools to claim what was mine so I could make choices from a place of power instead of scarcity. So I stayed. Same job, same desk, same work I loved. But now I did it knowing I could leave any time I wanted. Knowing that if Fletcher ever undervalued me, I had the freedom to walk away. That kind of security, it changes everything, even when the work stays the same. I used part of the settlement to establish the Caroline Hartwell Foundation for Women in STEM. Every year, it gives full-ride scholarships to 20 women pursuing degrees in science and engineering. Women who come from families that don't believe in them. Women who've been told they're not smart enough, not ambitious enough, not STEM enough. The applications we get, they break my heart and put it back together again. So many brilliant minds that almost gave up because nobody saw their potential. I kept the cottage, too. The one Thomas gave to my mother, she sold it immediately after the trial, couldn't bear to be associated with Caroline anymore. I bought it from the new owners for market value and spent 6 months restoring it exactly as Caroline had kept it. The garden, the laboratory she'd built in the shed out back, the bookshelves full of science texts and poetry collections. I go there some weekends, sit in the same chair where she recorded that video message, and I talk to her. I tell her about the foundation, about the women we've helped. I tell her about standing up in that courtroom and watching Thomas's empire crumble. I tell her I understand now why she waited, why she didn't give me the truth until I was ready to handle it. "Thank you," I say out loud, even though she can't hear me. "Thank you for believing I was strong enough." I don't speak to my mother anymore. After that email, she made her choice clear. Thomas over Carolyn. Thomas over me. Bradley over truth. I used to fantasize about her apologizing, about her finally seeing what they'd done to me, to Caroline, to the idea of family itself. But I've learned something this past year. Some people will never admit they were wrong, because admitting it means confronting who they chose to be. And that's more terrifying than losing a daughter. So I stopped waiting for her apology, stopped hoping she'd wake up one day and realize what she'd protected. The energy I used to spend on that hope, I now spend on the women in our scholarship program, on mentoring young designers at work, on people who want to grow instead of people who want to stay exactly as they are. The criminal trial concluded last month. Thomas was convicted on 3 counts of fraud and sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. He'll serve probably 5 with good behavior. Bradley wrote me an email the day the sentence came down. I know you probably won't read this, it said, but I need to say it anyway. I was raised to believe that our success was earned, that we deserved everything we had because we were smarter, harder working, better than other people. I was wrong. What my father did to Aunt Caroline, what he did to you, was theft, and I benefited from it my entire life. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that I'm trying to be different. I've left Hartwell Industries. I'm working at a nonprofit now, helping small businesses access capital. The pay is terrible compared to what I'm used to, and honestly, I'm struggling. But it feels more honest than anything I've ever done. I don't know if that means anything to you, but I hope someday it might. I read that email 3 times. I don't know if I believe him. Don't know if his transformation is real or just another performance. But I wrote back, short and simple. Good luck, Bradley. Prove it over time. Maybe he will. Maybe he won't. But at least he's trying, which is more than I can say for the rest of them. If you've made it this far, I want to leave you with something Caroline wrote in one of her last journal entries, which was included in the files on that USB drive. She wrote, "The people who truly love you will fight for you in ways you might never see. They'll document the truth when lies are easier. They'll wait for years until you're ready to hear what you need to hear. And they'll trust that when the moment comes, you'll be strong enough to handle it." I spent 32 years thinking I wasn't enough. Not smart enough, not ambitious enough, not Hartwell enough. Caroline spent 7 years building a case to prove that the problem wasn't me. The problem was people who measured worth in dollars and pedigree, who couldn't see value in anything that didn't serve their narrative. She gave me the truth. But more than that, she gave me proof that I'd always been enough, that I'd always been seen, that I'd always mattered to the person whose opinion actually counted. That's my story. A recipe box that wasn't about recipes at all. A USB drive full of evidence. A truth that waited 7 years to be cooked. If any part of this resonated with you, if you've ever been made to feel less than you are, if you've ever been told you're not enough by people who should have protected you, I want you to know something. You are enough. You've always been enough. The people who can't see that, that's their limitation, not yours. And you don't have to stay in their story. In the description below, you'll find links to resources about women in STEM, about family fraud, about standing up for yourself when it costs you everything. Check them out if you want. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, someone who's being made to feel small by people who should make them feel powerful, share it with them. I'm Maya Hartwell, and I cook the truth.